Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the moderator for tonight's panel discussion, the Editor-in-Chief of Religion News Service, Kevin Ekstrom.
Good evening, Washington. How many non-Washingtonians do we have with us tonight? A few? Okay. Well, welcome. Sorry about the weather. We tried to do what we could, but you never quite know this time of year. Is that a film or is that a film? We have what we think is a pretty dynamic discussion tonight, and we've got some really interesting and key people here to talk with you about it. As you heard, my name's Kevin Ekstrom. I am a resident here in D.C., and I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Religion News Service by day, and by night I am the new dad of two twin boys who are probably about ready to be fed. But we'll do this first. So we're going to talk about three things tonight. We're going to talk about the film, we're going to talk about poverty, and we're going to talk about what we can do about poverty. So first person that I'd like to bring out on stage really needs no introduction. You've already heard from him tonight, but the founder and president of Sojourners and a former member of the President's Advisory Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. His new book is called On God's Side, What Religion Forgets and Politics Hasn't Learned About Serving the Common Good, Reverend Jim Wallace. I also learned tonight he's a Little League coach and a rabid Nationals fan, which is exactly what we want. Next up, Reverend Adam Taylor, and he comes to us from World Vision, where he's the Vice President for Advocacy. He's an ordained Baptist minister, served in the White House as a fellow, and most importantly, he founded and was executive director of a group called Global Justice, which was aimed at mobilizing students around the issue of global human rights and economic justice, with degrees from Emory and the Kennedy School at Harvard. Please welcome Adam Taylor. Next up, a woman who you've already met, actually. You already know her story. You saw her in the film, Sheila Edwards Howard. Sheila is coming to us from Chicago. And she is the author of a book, which I actually just saw backstage, called Words Inspired by Memoir of a Church Girl. She's a gospel recording artist, and she founded the group Born to Be Light, which we're going to be hearing about a little bit later. And most importantly, she is an honors student in communications at Chicago State University. And last but certainly not least, the woman who is sort of bringing us all here together tonight, Linda Midgett, the producer and director of this film. She has worked at PBS, CNN, A&E, the History Channel, and you all remember last week that big award show in Hollywood where they hand out the angel statues, the Emmys. Well, she has two of those. She's coming to us from Charlotte, North Carolina tonight by way of Wheaton College originally. So without further ado, Linda Midgett. Okay, so really what we're hoping to do tonight is have more of a conversation than a lecture. And this is not an interview, although I've done a few of those in my day. But I really want to talk about the film itself with Linda and kind of some of the issues that were raised in the film. But Jim, I want to start with you. We are about a month away from an election where we are going to have one of two outcomes, where we're going to have a Democrat who is likely to be forced to cut spending, and a Republican who has already promised to cut spending, and a lot of that's going to come out of social programs. So against that backdrop, how do you advocate for the poor? How do you protect the poor? How do you make sure that whoever's in the White House or on Capitol Hill, perhaps especially on Capitol Hill, cares about this issue?
Well, the backdrop that you refer to and that is talked about all the time is wrong. So I was in an office with a senator the other day, and he's one of those who's going to try to make this deal, this grand bargain, to figure out the deficit and spending. And he's smart. I won't say who he is, but you all know his name. I said, Senator, he was in his conference room. I said, you and I know which 12 senators we could put around this table, and they could figure out a path to financial, fiscal responsibility and protect poor and vulnerable people. You know you could do that, don't you? Democrats and Republicans, you know you could do that. He said, yeah, we could do that. But then I said a lot of interests would come in the room, into this room. And they'd have their interests for their expenditures, the money they want for their interests. Wouldn't they? He said, that's what's going to happen. And in the end, who bears the burden of deficit reduction are those who don't have any interest in the room, those who nobody's speaking for. Reducing massive deficits is a moral issue. How you reduce them is a moral issue too. And the faith in you saying it is possible to do both, and we will not let you do this at the expense of those people whose stories we saw tonight.
Now you see why he has the job that he has. I understand. So we're going to try to move into the 21st century here and do some new technology, and we have a Skype question coming to us from New Orleans. Reverend Edwards and Ronald, who you saw on the oyster boat in the film, are going to be with us, and they're with Oxfam. Okay, maybe we'll come back to that. Technology is great when it works. So, Linda, the film. A lot of times you talk about poverty or you talk about the poor, and the image that people have is a guy sleeping on a park bench, maybe with all of his worldly possessions in a shopping cart, and goes to a soup kitchen. That's kind of what a lot of people think about. But that's not what we saw in this film. We saw a suburban dad at a food pantry. And I'm just sort of curious why you chose to show that side of poverty as opposed to maybe the more traditional side that a lot of people think of.
I think it's a more representative snapshot of what poverty looks like in our country at this point. When I started doing the research for this film, I actually wasn't personally aware of the growing problem of poverty in the suburbs. And I was really fascinated when I ran across the poverty in DuPage County, which is the county that was profiled here. Because as you mentioned, and I appreciate you mentioning where I went to college, because it's been a while, so saying that I came by way of Wheaton College was was pleasant, so thank you. But I know DuPage County, that's where I went to college, and it was traditionally has been a very, very wealthy upper class county. So that surprised me personally, and there are other stories that were surprising as I started looking at the diversity of poverty in our country, how it looks different everywhere, how it really is everywhere. So I think the stereotypical images that we have are just incorrect.
Now, Sheila, you're in the film, and one of the lines that really struck out at me was you said, if I could be on anything, it wouldn't be disability. that this is not something that you want to be on. It's not something you really chose to be on. Those people in DuPage County that Linda was talking about, what do you want them to think about when they think about you or your story or perhaps poverty in general? We saw some really nice houses in the film. What do you want the people in those houses, or even the people in this audience, to really think about somebody who's in poverty?
I think the first thing that I'd like for people to understand is that poverty is not the man lying in the street. That's the extreme. Poverty, in a lot of cases, is the person living right next door to you. They might be in a nice house, but they're struggling. They've tied a knot on the end of their last rope, trying to hold on until things turn around, and that's what poverty is. If you look in the mirror, you may be a whole lot closer to poverty than you think. So I think if I were to say anything to the people that are looking, when they look at me, there's nothing I hate worse than someone to look at me and say, oh, well, you're just living on the government. I promise you that's not the truth. I'm doing everything. But sometimes you just have to wait. And what we need from the government, I think, is that they broaden their horizons and that they look a little deeper and see that you're not giving us anything. We're just asking you to help us hold on until everything changes. There are a lot of people suffering, and we just need to hold on until times change. I have a lot of things going on, but until something changes, I'm going to live in poverty. But I'm not going to stop hoping, and I'm not going to stop moving. And I think that's important too. Don't give up. Just keep moving.
What role has your church played in your life, or in how has your church or the faith community impacted your attempts to sort of climb out of poverty, or what role has the church played for you personally?
I guess I would have to say personally that the church per se is not the building. My parents were pastors, and so that's where a lot of my root conviction with Christianity and God and hope comes from. But I must admit that the church where I attend now, they do have a food pantry. And I've been on the other side of that line where they're going around the corner waiting for just one bag of grocery. And these people depend on that. And recently, because we have to understand where they get this food from, they get it from corporations and companies that have an abundance. Well, most corporations and companies, they don't have an abundance anymore. So the donations are less. And I've seen those bags go from plentiful and boiling over to just a few things in the bag. And I think that with the church, that they hold on to, and that the government give them some help. All they need is a few extra dollars to buy something instead of just trying to depend on people to give them everything. And that will help those 200-300 people outside that door every week.
And so for people who might be curious, you said you go to a Full Gospel Baptist church, right?
Yes, I go to a Tri-Stone Full Gospel Baptist Church in Chicago.
Adam, I'm going to come back to you in just a second, but I understand that we do have Skype with us now. So Reverend Edwards and Ronald, who you saw in the film in New Orleans, welcome.
Good to be on.
There they are.
I'm in New Orleans, and I'm from the East Bank of Plaquemine Parish. And as a result of Hurricane Isaac, we have about 300 families that been brought below the poverty line again because they lost all their possession. They lack resources. So we're hoping that the government will provide the resources for these folks to rebuild their home. We need some resources to build our levee and build a wall of protection that's proper. So we need a lot of resources for renovating homes. So we hope that the government will provide their resources, or we're going to have 500 more people, families, not people that are in poverty in this country.
Okay, so we have a sort of direct request from the grassroots that people out there need help. Adam, when you're lobbying or advocating in Washington on poverty, how do you convince the powers that be that there needs to be help for these people in an era of declining resources? I mean, it's not like we have piles of money sitting around in this town anymore. So how do you make the case amidst all of the other competing interests in this town that people like Reverend Edwards or Ronald in New Orleans need help?
It's a great question. I'm glad you used the word advocacy instead of lobbying. I do think that there are some piles of money laying around. The problem is they're often in the wrong places. And one of the challenges is that the poor don't have a super PAC that is often advocating on their behalf. What they do have is their own voices, which is crucial. But they also have the faith community in large measure who often tries to be a voice for the voiceless, and that's certainly kind of built into the way World Vision looks at its call to be an advocate for the vulnerable and the weak. And while we're known primarily for our international work, we've got programs in 14 different cities around the country that come alongside educational institutions and try to provide support and work with young people to try to empower them to make the best choices possible and have all the opportunities available to them. And we're grateful that both the Sheila's children had a chance to be in that program. But there's no question there are many families that are sinking deeper in the quicksands of poverty. There are communities, like we just heard about, that have been devastated by natural disasters. And I think it's crucial to understand that government does play a crucial role in both providing a very basic safety net so that people don't fall down the cliff of poverty, and can provide emergency assistance where disasters strike and people are struggling to rebuild their lives. And of course, government can't do it alone. It's got to be do it in a smart way. But oftentimes they partner with nonprofit organizations, with churches, with the private sector, who all need to play their role in order to address many of the issues we're talking about.
So this sort of new image of poverty that we saw tonight, suburban poverty. I think a lot of what World Vision is known for is, going after a tsunami or a hurricane or earthquake in Chile or wherever, and that's kind of been your specialty. But what does it mean for a group like World Vision when you have suburban poverty here at home? Is it, obviously you guys already work here, but does that complicate your work? Does it add to your work? Does it make it hard to advocate for the international side on this hand, but also the domestic folks at home? So what does poverty in DuPage County do to your line of work?
Well, it makes it more challenging in some ways because that form of poverty is much more invisible, as you've heard in the film and heard described by this panel. But it's that much more important that we bring those stories to light, that we humanize the very families and people that are struggling in the midst of these struggles and these circumstances. I mean, clearly, around the world, there is oftentimes a more acute form of poverty where people, may be dealing with severe hunger or drought or famine. But that doesn't diminish just how pressing the issue is at home. And one of the things I think it's important to emphasize, and this was emphasized in the film, is the poverty of violence. Particularly for our young people, they are struggling with a great deal of trauma that was talked about in the film, where they're facing a great deal of alienation, of deprivation, a real loss of hope and meaning for their lives and of dignity for their lives. They're living in unsafe streets and broken families, and there's no magic bullet to changing that situation around, but it's important to tell the success stories of where we have been able to help turn lives around through the combination of government programs, through the work of the church, which helps to turn around lives and redeem lives in many respects, and through the work of the private sector.
Okay. Jim, I'm going to come back to you, but now we're going to go back to Skype, and we have a question coming in from Portland, Oregon, at the G92 Summit. Hello, Portland.
Professor at Concordia University.
Okay, do you have a question for our panel? Or not? Well, it's good to know they're watching us in Portland. So, Jim, Adam talked about making sure that this face of poverty is visible, and advocating. Speaking here as a member of the media, as an editor, I will be the first to admit that writing stories about poverty can be very challenging. Getting reporters to write about poverty can be really challenging. People think it's kind of boring. And you say, no, this is an important issue. Well, okay, we'll write about some statistics or something that come out. But it's very easy in this town to get people really agitated over gay marriage, abortion, defense spending, you name it. How do you make poverty sexy?
You know, what Linda did in this film was she told the stories of people that weren't used to being poor. Somebody who would donate to a food bank now has to go there and get their food. Somebody who's a fifth-generation shrimper can't find any work anymore. Somebody who had made it very well and fell down the stairs, had a trauma and couldn't pull back. And I think it's a hopeful sign that now we're seeing, as Sheila just said, we see people who are poor in our families. How many folks have a relative with a house underwater? I'll raise my hand for that. So all kind of folks now, the poverty line hasn't been adjusted for years, okay? If you take the people who are just above the poverty line or a paycheck or two away, it comes out to almost half of us as the American people. So what Washington thinks is less important to me, because they're always, things come here last, things change here last. What's happening in the country is we're realizing that we have a societal crisis here. It's not about government aid, the economy isn't working. The economy isn't working so people can support and sustain themselves. When Ronnie says, I don't have any confidence in the future, I worry about my children. That is a problem for us as a society. And so tomorrow, when they have the domestic poverty or domestic policy debate, we want Jim Lair to ask a question about this. The question shouldn't be, are you better off? The question should be, are we our neighbor's keeper? Or are we not? Because more than half of us are close to that edge now and worried about the future and our kids. So we have failed when this happens. We have failed. So how do we as a society begin to have a vision for how to move back to being those who understand that we are brothers and sisters, that we are our neighbor's keeper? That's the question I'd like to see asked tomorrow on the debate. And we're going to talk about how you can help do that later on.
If I could just build on that for a second, I think particularly in debates and in campaigns, poverty does tend to be a taboo issue. Many of us often joke that Matthew 25 gets rewritten to say, just as you did to the middle class, you also did for me when it comes to our political system. But I think there's ways in which many people are trying to reframe the issue of poverty, because for some, when you use the word poverty, it's stigmatizing or somehow it's blaming, and certainly I think we have to be honest about the realities of poverty and the kind of existential hells that people are dealing with. But at the same time, there is a growing chasm in this country of opportunity, an opportunity gap, that I think most Americans are feeling in a pretty profound and direct way. If you look at the rung of the opportunity ladder, which most Americans think is crucial to the pursuit of the American dream, it's missing some rungs for many parts of our society. And particularly for young people, there are many young people whose life chances are very much determined based on which zip code they're born into and which family they're born into, or what kind of family. And that contradicts both American values and core biblical values. And so I think there's a way that we can make some progress on this issue, certainly by talking about poverty, but also talking about the things underneath poverty, which include a huge opportunity gap that needs to be addressed, not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's the very smart thing to do for the future of our economy and for the health of our country.
So, Sheila, we have a question here from one of our Twitter followers, @RealAaronGraham, as opposed to the @FakeAaronGraham, I guess. Says, if you had $100 million to invest in poverty alleviation in America, how would you spend it? So there's a question there for the folks in this town, who actually have the money to allocate. From where you sit, if we had $100 million, what would be the most helpful to somebody in your shoes?
I would say it would be three different things. The first thing that I would do is I would do something about the food stamps. Because people have to eat. You have to first satisfy that basic need for people to start
So,
feeling.
so boosting food stamp funding.
Boosting the amount of money that you allow food stamps. They've actually cut food stamps for most of the people. If you don't have children, or there are certain things that they've done, there are a lot of people out there without even food.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing that I would do is I would address housing. I would adjust housing. I would find a way to maybe do something to encourage people, do a batch program where if I had the money, if I give you this much, you'll give me that much, and we can help this person. Because a lot of people are over under in their mortgages and they have no place to live. So I would absolutely do that if I could,
Okay. So food stamps, housing, and third one?
food stamps, housing. I did have three. I think the other thing that I would do is medical. Medicare and Medicaid, they're cutting back so bad. I had an interesting thing happen recently. I went to the dentist and they said, they've cut that out. You can't go to the dentist anymore unless you're just getting a tooth pulled. Well, I had to look down the string of where that was. And if you have an adult, because you're an adult on Medicaid, you can't go and have your teeth repaired. So what happens when you can't chew your food properly and break it down in your body, and then now you have other issues happening with your body? Who's going to pay that hospital bill when you go? They're going to still pay. So if I could do something with that money, another thing that I would do, I was probably spend it on lobbying to get the people, the parties that be, the powers that be to, remember, we're all Americans. We're Americans. We want to be treated like that.
So the news flash here is that somebody wants to spend more money in this town on lobbying.
I wish that Aaron had said $100 billion rather than $100 million, at least if you're talking about federally, because I think $100 million, unfortunately, is a drop in the bucket. But $100 million really could enable us to do some innovative things to support programs that we know work and common ground solutions. Unfortunately, many of these solutions, like the earned income tax credit, the child tax credit, which both Republicans and Democrats have traditionally supported, it was actually an idea that was born by Republicans, to investing in early childhood education, which has been a crucial program for providing a good start to life for many children. I can name off a whole series of things, but unfortunately, the brokenness of Washington and the polarization and partisanship in this town has overshadowed a lot of common ground solutions that I think most Americans and most members of Congress would agree to. So that's where we need to focus a lot of our energy.
In fact, Adam will recall, we once had a poverty forum, and we had smart policy people on both sides of the aisle come together and find 10, 12 things that we know work in helping people lift themselves out of poverty. And we found common ground between liberal and conservative people on those things that work. And then we thought this could be a caucus, a poverty caucus. And we couldn't find political leaders who would embrace these solutions that the smartest policy people came up with. So this is a will problem. This is a will problem. It's finally not a resource problem. It's a will problem. And I think that, you support work, education, and family. You support those three things, you're going to make great progress. Most Americans would support that. But we need leadership that talks about it, calls for it, and provides really a moral and spiritual foundation for sound policies that we know will work.
Linda, I want to come back to you and talk about the film itself. But first, we have a comment from the folks at North Park University in Chicago. Some good Swedes on the north side of Chicago. So this is also coming to us by Skype. So Chicago, hello.
Wave and keep waving, don't stop. Hello from Chicago.
That's my
That was an
Chicago.
affirmation, not a question.
I think they're having a little bit too much glug in Andersonville tonight. Okay, we're going to go to Cincinnati next. University Christian Church and Cincinnati Faith and Justice.
Okay.
All right. Actually, we're going to go back to Linda. Okay, Linda. I'd like to talk to you about sort of the artistry behind this film. And it didn't dawn on me the first time, but the second time, there's no narrator in this film. And the narrators are the people like Sheila and John who are in this film. Talk to me about why you wanted to do it that way.
There were several reasons. The biggest one being that Sheila can talk about being in poverty in a way that I can't. But I felt like those first-person stories broke down more stereotypes by allowing people to view the people who are struggling as individuals and not as statistics, not as a problem, not as a downer kind of story, but just people. Because when you meet Sheila and you meet John and you meet James and Ronnie, you like them. I mean, they're wonderful people. They're very intelligent. They're hardworking. They're enjoyable. They just have so much to share and contribute to the world and society. And I feel like meeting them as individuals, hearing their voices and their stories, is the best way to have a heart for them, to develop empathy for them. But beyond that, too, I think it's important. This is something actually that Reverend Julian, who's in the film, brought up that really impacted me. I think it's important that in our discussions of poverty that we listen to the people who are there, instead of it being those of us who aren't there and haven't had that personal experience and don't have the best perspective. And I think more frequently than not, the people talking about it are those who aren't experiencing it. One of my favorite quotes in the film is when Sheila said, you know, people start talking about poverty and they give reasons why people are in poverty and they have no idea what they're talking about. And that I think was really profound and is certainly what I've experienced when I began filming this.
How did you find people like Sheila or Ronald or the guy in Charlotte whose name I never forget, but like James? How did you find them?
You know, it was a real collaboration. World Vision helped. That's how I got in touch with Sheila. We had so many wonderful funding partners. Oxfam is the organization that got me in touch with Ronnie. John, actually, I found through the food pantry as I read an article about the struggles that they were facing. So it was really, part of them I found, others were brought to me. So it was, it's not as hard as you might imagine.
Now,
you know?
I noticed in the film that John seemed a little bit, not nervous, but a little nervous, almost a tad ashamed to be sort of telling his story. He didn't want his kids shown, for example. Sheila, when you first were approached about this, were you nervous? I mean, what went through your mind when they said, we want you to be in a movie about poverty?
If I were to be honest, my pride got in the way first, and I thought about, wow, nobody knows that I'm going through this. If I do this film, everybody will know that I'm going through hardship. But then the other side of me, the Christian side of me, stepped up and said, maybe by telling my story, maybe by sharing my hardships and letting people see that all of us are not lazy and we're not trying to get a handout and we don't want the government to give us anything, maybe that will help shed some light and help those others that are out there. There's a lot of Sheilas out there. And a lot of people really just don't want anybody to know that they're going through. But there's no shame in going through when you're doing your best. The shame only comes when you're sitting down and just taking the handout. As long as you're doing the best that you could possibly do, there's no shame in that. And we live in the greatest country anywhere, America. I mean, this is the only place that you could actually go and be poor one day and rich the next. So there's no shame in going through what you're going through. Everybody is being touched, either extended, someone in your family, or you're going through it yourself. So I was a little embarrassed at first, but then I said, no, I'm not, because I'm proud of the accomplishments I've made. And if I don't stand up, it may be my children next time that have to go through a hardship because I wouldn't speak out.
Can I get an amen on that?
Can I say a word about why the courage for Sheila in sharing her story and what difference that's going to make? Because in sharing her story, seeing these stories, that is going to change our stories. Now, we can't hear the people wherever they are, but 1,600 places around the country are watching these stories. And the reason poverty isn't as sexy in DC is because, you know what? In this town, they don't know any of those stories. They don't see anybody. In the text that Adam quoted, Matthew 25, Jesus says, as you've done to the least of these, you've done to me. And they say, Lord, when do we see you? Hungry, thirsty, naked, stranger, sick, and in prison. We didn't know it was you. In this town, that's the question. When do we see you? When do we see? Well, around the country, this is real, and the courage to tell that story is going to change other people's stories. And that's when movements finally even change things back in Washington.
And if I could just reinforce that it's both the awareness that's so crucial in the relationships with people that are struggling, that are living below the poverty line, but it's also taking action based on that awareness. When I grew up as a part of Generation X, very much a generation infatuated with community service, and that has been a beautiful expression of discipleship, or beautiful expression of civic engagement, but it's not a substitute for trying to challenge our politicians where necessary and get them to pay attention to the things that often get left off the agenda. And these aren't always sexy actions either, but literally the currency of our democracy in many respects is writing a letter to your congressional member, making a phone call to say you care about these issues and you're aware and you want to see more leadership, by building a relationship with their congressional office. And we actually do that with young people through the Youth Empowerment Program. One of the most inspiring parts of my life is having a chance to train some of these young people, take them to the Hill, they walk the corridors of power, and literally speak truth to power about their own reality and about the kind of policies that need to be changed and the kind of budget decisions that need to be made in order to break the back of poverty in America.
Jim, we've got a question that I'd like you to tackle from Twitter from Groff MR, or maybe that's Groff Mister. At any rate, he asks, or he or she asks, is public money being used wisely? And would you continue with our programs that we have now or start over?
Well, this thing that Sheila said about what people think, I was talking to a pastor recently, and good guy, good pastor, but he says, I'm worried about all this dependency, these government programs. So what are you worried about? He said, well, like food stamps. So I said, Austin, do you know that 75% of the people that get food stamps are families with children? Did you know that most people under the poverty line have jobs, they work, just don't make enough money? And the food stamps are only for a period of time to help people get back on their feet. He said, oh, you should get that out. You should get that out. So, I'd like to just get out what's actually happening on the ground. We know what things work and what things don't. The circle of protection has come together, and it's the Catholic bishops, the National Association of Evangelicals, National Council of Churches, all these World Vision, these denominations, and we have asked the President Obama and Governor Romney to make a 5-minute video for the churches on what they would do about the highest poverty rate in almost 50 years. And they did it. They made those videos, and they both spoke more about this than either of them had before. And when we raise the question, then we can say, what works? I'm happy to not do things that don't work. But what works and what doesn't work? We know now what works. Let's focus on those things that work and help people really change their lives. So those videos are available, and we wouldn't comment on them, I said, and I'm not going to tonight, but we're going to hold both of them accountable to the things that they said.
Can I want to jump in. Because there's no narration, you don't hear my voice in the film, but this is a little bone that I have to pick. This came up time and again for me with the film, the question of poor people being lazy. And, you know, rich people are lazy too. Really, laziness is a vice, and it is not contained within one social class. And it's really not fair to associate poor people with laziness. There are some lazy poor people. There are some very lazy middle class people. There are some very, very lazy wealthy people. And their laziness also impacts our society.
We got a last question, and that was really good, actually. We could just end it there, but I won't. Our last question, and I'd like to just go down the line. You have a one-sentence answer, and this question came in to us. I don't exactly know who, but it's a good question. And then we're going to give it to Jim to take us home. What would it take to cut the poverty level in half again? So based on what you've seen, what you've lived, where you work, and what you're called to do, what would it take to cut poverty in half?
I think it takes compassion, first and foremost.
Okay, good answer.
I think it takes our elected officials inviting God to the bargaining table so we can get on one accord and get the job done.
Telling a preacher they have one sentence is like giving a Tic Tac to a whale. So, my one sentence answer is a social movement is necessary. But I want to just emphasize one point about history. No, bear with me here. There was a line in the film that said in the 1950s, our country was successful in cutting poverty in half, and we did it again in the 1960s. My parents were married in 1968, made a controversial decision. My mom is African American, my father's white. And in that year, Dr. King was assassinated while organizing a poor people's campaign to try to accomplish a goal like this. Then, back in 1968, the national minimum wage is worth $10 per hour. We're now below that, below actually $9 per hour, so lower now than in 1968. And there were 40 million Americans living in poverty in 1968, and now there's 46. So we have actually lost a lot of ground on some key indicators. And I think without a social movement, we're going to continue to lose ground. And to me, the social movement is in this room. It's the people watching this video, and the organizations like World Vision and Sojourners and many others that you can act with in order to address this crisis.
Okay. On behalf of everyone here and on behalf of Sojourners, I would like to thank our panelists, Linda, Sheila, Adam, Jim. You're the boss here. You get the last word. Take us home.
Well, I'm going to stand up. As this is the altar call. I didn't get to answer that last question. By the way, he was in my class at Harvard, and I taught him how to do really long sentences.
Well, I'm an editor who specializes in short ones.
So, the reason we did this tonight, this is the eve of a debate tomorrow. Have you heard? There's a debate tomorrow. Okay? We want to spark a conversation and ask the candidates how they will address poverty in the debate tomorrow night. The question you just asked us, we asked at a presidential debate 4 years ago. Would you commit to cutting poverty in half in 10 years? And the answer was, yes, but I can't do it alone. It's not been talked about since. You don't do something that you don't commit to doing. So tonight, I need everybody who has a Twitter account to pull out their phone. Come on, pull it out. Pull out your cell phone right now and go ahead and punch in the text you see on the screen, right there. Pull out your phone and punch in the text you see on the screen, and it will lead you in the right direction to tweet Jim Lehrer, Barack Obama, and Mitt Romney. Go ahead and punch in that text you see on the screen, or go to thelinemovie.com. Now, if you're not on Twitter, that's okay. But if you have a computer, go to www.thelinemovie.com. There's a Take Action button. It'll send an email right now to the candidates asking them the same thing. And we'll copy the debate moderators with the question. It is possible to get a question in this debate tomorrow. If we did that, there'd be a conversation across America. You can help make that happen tonight. And then share and share and share. If you've been moved by this phone and these stories, share this film. Talk to your friends. A discussion guide is up. And copies of The Line are available, I'm told, at the exits of the theater for free. And you can take one. So here's the reality. This is the most expensive political campaign in our history. Hundreds of millions have been spent. We're about to cross $1 billion being spent. How about spending that on poverty, for example? $1 billion. We don't have that kind of money, but we have you. We got 1,600 sites across the country. It's time to share the message with your friends and family. It costs millions to put up TV ads, but we can reach millions through social media. That's how we got the sites, that's how we can act, and that's how we can share. I want to thank Kevin. I want to thank Linda for doing this film, Sheila for your courage, Adam is a partner. I want to thank Sojourners. I want to thank Tim King and Carrie Adams and Bo Underwood who made this thing work. I want to thank all of you and all those who are watching who we can't hear with their questioning, but they're watching. Thank all of you. And tonight it's time to act. Don't just watch, don't just listen, but act. Let's change the conversation in this country, starting with what we do walking out from here. Thank you very, very much.